Hey everybody, welcome back. We have another upgrade video for you guys today, and this is one that some people have been talking about. We shot a video earlier stating that we had purchased the new Klipsch RP600M Mark II, and we took some measurements on it and talked about what they've done. And today we're going to dive into it a little bit. Now that we've had a little time with these things, we're going to look at the original Klipsch RP600M versus the new Klipsch RP600M versus some tweaks that we just did with it. And I know I've been a little tough on the Klipsch line as a whole because they've had some engineering problems with some of those models where they've got drivers that are just not in phase, and as the crossover rolls into each other, they don't sum at all, and it's just a hole there. And as you go up vertically, it gets worse. And some of them were a bit of a disaster, on top of the fact that the parts quality was pretty poor. And I beat on them a little bit on this. When I did some upgrade videos for various models, I showed exactly what was going on, and that there were phase issues with the drivers. That means that the tweeter is delayed in time versus the woofer, and they're not compensating for that, and the time arrivals are just off. Well, Klipsch has gone back to the drawing board. Maybe they've been watching my videos, and they've redesigned some of those models, and they've come out with the Mark II versions. And this is the Mark II version of the 600M. And we're going to look at these things and see if did they in fact make some improvements. Have they corrected some problems? And let's look at the box itself first. And I noticed there is a brace running vertically through the box on this one. I don't think the original one had that, so it's a little better box. It's slightly larger than the original, and it's probably to compensate for the airspace that thing took up. The woofer looks the same. It measures slightly different than the original, so they've done a little something there to the woofer. Tweeter is the same, and there was really not a lot of issues with the tweeter. The magnetically held on grill is a nice touch. I really like that. Port's still in the back, and they did what looked like a little binding post upgrade. Instead of the little binding post cup with the little cheesy parts in there, they've got what look like some decent looking binding posts. They've got some aluminum caps on here that are anodized black and red, and they look better. However, when you go over to the inside, we notice that the terminal there, the tabs that this thing connects to, way back here, they're steel. Yep, not copper, not brass, just steel. And the nut on it is steel also. So, wow. Come on, Klipsch. Okay, crossover-wise. This is the crossover out of the original. The woofer had a iron core inductor on there, laminated iron core, and electrolytic capacitor on it. Ugh. It had one little polyester type cap in the tweeter and a little air core on there, which is better, and it had a sandcast resistor. The new crossover for the new model still has the steel laminated iron core inductor on the woofer circuit, but it has what looks like maybe a polystyrene cap there. Not sure if this is polycap or not. It's probably I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said polystyrene. Polyester film, which are a lesser cost version of a polypropylene. There's a lot of polys out there, aren't there? So I think that's what this is. They don't print anything on it other than Klipsch, so it's kind of hard to verify, but I suspect by the shape of it that that's what's going on. The tweeter circuit has a little similar cap on it, an air core inductor. It also had a notch filter on it with a little air core inductor, and they mounted these things right next to each other in the same direction. They should never do that. This is poor coil orientation, and it had, of course, the sandcast resistor. So better parts than the original by one capacitor. Everything else is the same. So did they fix the phase problem? Let's look at these things, and I'm gonna have my editor Ron throw up some double stacked measurements again so we can see. Let's look at the original Klipsch RP600 frequency response and the new Klipsch RP600 frequency response. As you can see, there's no longer a big hole right there at the crossover point. It sums a little flatter. The tweeter is still above the woofer level, but not as bad as it was. It's about a dB lower in sensitivity, so it's not way out there aggressive at you, but it's still hot. I would say it's still 3 dB hotter than it needs to be in the whole top end. So there's that. It's always got that forward in your face, bright highs to it. The original RP600 crossover versus the new, you can see that the newer one is now more in phase. They've let the tweeter come down a little bit lower, which is what I did with the original, and that tweeter can come down a little bit lower. And a little lower crossover point, and they're in phase. So they did a much better job on the new model in that way. Let's look at a horizontal off-axis response. You'll see that the old one with the big dip in the response, it's a pretty uneven off-axis response, versus the new one, which is much better. This little horn tweeter has a nice dispersion as you move off-axis. It's pretty well controlled. The original vertical off-axis versus new vertical off-axis. If you looked at the original, the time arrival was such that as you moved up, that hole got deeper and deeper, and it just created a big hole in the response. With a newer version of it, it's not that bad. You can see that they're more in phase, and it stays more consistent. Let's look at the impedance responses of both the original and the newer one, and we'll see there's still a big mismatch in the impedance. They're just using basically an inline resistor to bring the level of the tweeter down, which creates resistance, instead of doing an L pad or something where they're balancing that a little bit better and bringing that level down. What happens is a lot of amplifiers see those loads differently. You know, a solid state amplifier tends to deliver more current at a lower impedance load than it does at a higher impedance load, versus tube amps, not necessarily. They deliver the same regardless, and some tube amps may like higher impedances. So when you see an imbalance like that, different amps react to that a little bit differently, and it should be more balanced. So I got to give them a thumbs down again on a poor impedance curve. Spectral decays. The spectral decay was pretty clean on these originally. It's still fairly clean on them now. There's a little more energy going on there in the spectral decay right at the top of the woofer's range. There's a little bit more of a peak on this woofer versus the original that we measured. But all in all, the spectral decays on these things were pretty clean. So, what do we do to these things? Well, Hobbs ordered this thing, and it's his pair of speakers, and I turned him loose with it. He's been my protege there at the shop, and he's learning this stuff really well. And he did a really good job with it. He started from scratch and made it to one point. I looked at it and made some tweaks, and then I said, you know what, let's look at the original crossover. Let's go back and see what they were doing and maybe build on that. He went back to the original, made some tweaks to that, balanced things out. Let's look at what he did. He did a good job. Let's look at the frequency response now. Hey, pretty balanced, huh? Pretty smooth. Much smoother, much more balanced sound. I know you guys are saying, oh, it lost sensitivity. Well, if you just look at where this tweeter was out there screaming louder than it needed to be versus it's brought down now to a level range, then yeah, it lost some sensitivity. But if you look at the woofer's range below 300 hertz, it's the same sensitivity that it had. We just took the woofer's response and just brought the top of its response down a little bit and brought the tweeter level down to match it, and used more of an L-pad style resistor loads on the tweeter to bring the whole tweeter level down and bring the impedance down a little bit so it's not so mismatched. Let's look at the crossover response. You'll see what I'm talking about here. And they still sum really well. And look at the tweeter's response now. The tweeter's response is much smoother than it was. It's very smooth tweeter response. Look at the horizontal off-axis. It is now really smooth, drops off evenly as you move off-axis without any peaks or dips or anything going on in the off-axis. The vertical off-axis looks great as well. You can move up vertically, and it doesn't change tonality. It doesn't create a huge hole in the response as you move up vertically. So, did a great job. Looking at the impedance curve, you can see that the high end up there at the tweeter end has been brought down a little bit. It's a little more balanced than it was. The rest of the load is still right about where it was. I want to say that the woofer had a minimum impedance dip. Let's see where that was. There was 4.1 ohms. So yeah, it's still right there where it was. I don't know what they call this from the factory, but it does dip to 4 ohms. Spectral decay, still very clean. There's a little bit still going on at the top of the woofer's range there in that one area, but it's not that bad. So all in all, brought the levels down, balanced them, and huge improvement in the clarity and detail levels on this thing. We went from this iron core slug here, the little light, probably 19 gauge or 18 gauge laminated iron core, to a much larger 16 gauge air core inductor on this thing. So we went up in quality there. We've got a higher quality JB polycap that's in that woofer circuit, plus one of the Dayton resistors that are the copper resistors. So good quality stuff there. The tweeter circuit still just has 5 parts. We've got a sonic cap on it, which is going to improve clarity significantly over the caps that are there. We've got an air core inductor, and we've got a pair of resistors that are working more as an L pad. There's also a little bitty inductor that we put right at the very top end to bring the top peak out of the tweeter down a little bit. So the parts count is still the same parts count than it was from the factory. So we didn't add a lot of parts. Now, the way they put this box together with this divider down the middle, it may be a little easier to mount these on 2 boards and mount one on the back side of the brace, one here and one at the front, to give it some room, because the brace running through it there goes across the bottom of the box too, so it's going to making one crossover across the bottom a bit of a problem. But that's okay. Pretty easy still to separate it and put it onto 2 separate boards. I think all in all, for what the price of these are, after you upgrade it, it actually turns it into a nice balanced speaker that you guys are going to love. And the total on everything, which is all the new parts, and these are the parts for just one speaker, because I'm just showing you old crossover parts for one. All the crossover parts for the pair, 1 pair of tube connectors, which are really going to help, because the binding posts that are on there, like I said, they got steel parts on them. Ugh, I just can't believe they do that. You can replace 1 set of these with a set of tube connectors, and if you want, you can run jumpers over to the old ones, and you can use either or. I love it when you guys do that, because you always come back and tell me how much better it sounds when you use tube connectors versus the binding posts. I love hearing that every time. So, set of tube connectors, 1 sheet of no-res to help finish tightening up the cabinet resonances. Everything total $369, so it's still a pretty reasonable upgrade. It's a fun project, and it's going to bring these things up considerably in performance. We're also going to build out this pair, and later we'll do some more videos and maybe some audio clips or something, and we may send them out to some of the reviewers that have the factory one and let them do some side-by-side comparisons or something like that, and give you guys some subjective feedback that's outside of GR research. We're going to work on doing that too. That's it for this little Klipsch upgrade. Yeah, I know we do a lot of Klipsch upgrades, but this one I think is a much easier one than some of the others that we've done, and turned out really well. So that's it for this video. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't. I appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next video.